Good morning, James. I feel like we both, maybe because of our energy levels and also because of how fast things are moving in the world, we kind of have to timestamp when we're talking so that if something horrible happens, we don't get called out for it. So it is currently January 20 at 9:23 a.m.
We're less than 3 hours away from a new presidency. Joe Biden has not yet been assassinated. Knock on wood.
Kind of terrifying the next couple hours.
It's just very apprehensive, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there was talk of stuff maybe happening at state capitals and not much happened. Maybe the military posturing works, or who knows, but hoping and praying that nothing goes wrong today.
Yeah, and I saw the comparison of today as like a second kind of New Year's Day. And at least for me, it really does feel like there's actually a change, there's a shift in the air.
Oh, it just feels like a weight lifted off my shoulders, and partially just because I think we'll be headed in a better direction, policy wise. I don't perfectly align with Joe Biden, but I align with him more than Trump. But I think it's so much more of just I am so sick of the Trump administration being in the news every single day.
Yeah.
I'm just so tired of it.
I'm really looking forward to, when the biggest scandal the Obama administration had was that he wore a tan suit once or saluted with coffee in his hand.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to that kind of news.
No,
again.
I remember when there was a comparison at 100 days or something, and there was all these scandals in the Trump administration. And they're at 100 days, the media was also freaking out about Obama, but it was that he asked for a certain sauce at a restaurant.
Yeah.
Oh boy, please just give us a boring news story.
Yes, so I'm looking forward to a boring presidential administration again. I'm also happy that Trump no longer has the football.
Yes.
Humanity made weapons of mass destruction enough to destroy our species several times over, distributed them around the planet, handed the control of those weapons over to questionable people, especially over the last 4 years. And thankfully nothing bad has come of it yet.
Yeah. I feel like we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before we kind of get into our topic, which is basically going to be the current political events in the United States since, just in 2021, because we recorded our last episode on January 5th, the day before the Capitol attack. Let's just talk about the past few weeks not in the news. How's your life been, James?
Personally, there's been a lot of changes. I've moved into my grandfather's house nearer to where my university is.
Nice.
And something that's been weighing a lot on me personally is the new strain of COVID, the B117 variant. Which is estimated to be up to twice as infectious. So places like much of the U.S., which have had an R0 of about 1, we can kind of hold cases steady.
Which, for people who aren't as savvy with that, an R0 is basically the average amount of people infected by someone, new infections when someone gets it. So an R0 of 1 would mean that if you have it, on average, you would give it to one other person, correct?
Correct. So currently, many places in the U.S. are holding steady at an R0 of 1 or slightly more than 1. Cases are climbing, deaths are climbing, but it's nothing drastic. The B117 variant is, we're not entirely sure. It's new. But we think it may be up to twice as infectious, and so that takes you from an R0 of 1 to an R0 of 2.
And even if it's only, 50% more infectious, that would be very, very concerning.
Yes, and based on case numbers from Ireland, from the UK, cases jumped drastically.
Yeah, though the charts and stuff from particularly Ireland and the UK is just terrifying. It just seems to, in a matter of days, shoot up a crazy amount.
Yes, so personally, I've gone back into lockdown like it's April or May. I'm not going into the grocery store. I'm not seeing people in person. And especially because I'm living with my grandfather. We
did, a couple days ago, get to see each other in person outside with masks, which we haven't got to do in a long time. I've been talking to you, whether with D&D or the podcast or just, chatting, pretty consistently, virtually. But it'd been a few months, other than maybe just a passing wave outside, since I had chatted to you in person.
Yeah, that was good. It's always good to spend a day in the woods.
Yeah.
It was fun. And it made me realize that even though it is January, we just had like 2 inches of snow last night, I can still see people outside with a fire. So I bought a fire ring the other day. That's something I'm personally excited about.
I mean, you've been making a lot of very adult purchases. What, you bought Wi-Fi, you helped pick out a mattress, buying a fire ring. Look at you.
Yeah. I bought a mop the other day and then used it for 3 hours. Very exciting things. So I guess that's what's going on in my life.
Yeah. I mean, classes are starting up for both of us of the new semester. That's, exciting, and, it's fine. It's just work. But online classes, most of my stuff is hybrid. I think I only have something in person twice a week.
Same here.
And that's not even every week. Some of the, twice a week potentially, and then some weeks I won't be there. So, it's fine. I'm learning. It's just not as fun. Yep. And so we both had early morning classes today, which is why we're recording at 9:30 or so.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be a morning person this semester. I don't know if I mentioned that in our New Year's episode. I'm going to try to become a morning person because I've got morning classes. It's not going to be easy, though.
No, and I really should do that, too. No, I mean, I had an 8 a.m. class, and I got out of bed at 7:50, and because it was online, just, wrap myself in a blanket, crack my laptop open, and join the Zoom meeting, especially on the first day, because we're just, going over the syllabus and stuff.
Yeah, I guess life is kind of quiet, although it's starting to be more busy.
Yeah. No, I suppose with the pandemic, I mean, I haven't been doing a whole lot different recently. I mean, a lot of my friends at university are taking the semester at home because they've got all online classes. So I think only 1 or 2 of my friends is actually even on campus. So I haven't seen them yet. Maybe I'll go for a hike with them or something. But, I don't really have that temptation even to go hang out with friends because most of mine aren't even here. So, I'm not changing a whole lot. I don't really see people outside of my girlfriend and then work, and I'll, see my family with masks every once in a while.
Right. And, none of those are things that I think you would be likely to change.
No, it's I'm going to keep going to work, and I'm going to keep seeing my girlfriend, and I'm already I used to see my family every weekend, and now that I got a new laptop so I can edit my videos for church from anywhere, I used to have to edit them at home. I'll probably still see my family fairly regularly, but I don't think I'll be spending as much time as I was. I was spending nights at home every weekend, and I don't think I'll be doing that, which isn't necessarily a pandemic decision, but it corresponds nicely with decisions I would maybe feel like I should have made.
Yeah, that's where we are personally. But as you mentioned,
Okay, continue.
I was really torn. I don't want to talk about the Capitol Hill riot, and I feel like we can't not talk about it.
I mean, as soon as, I was, we went through a 2-week cycle, and I was like, okay, we got to think about this next topic for podcast. I was like, well, we could try and do another topic, but our intro would just turn into talking about it, because, we talk about the past few weeks.
Yeah, so I guess if people listen to this 20 years from now and don't know what we're talking about, which
I think they'll know what they're talking about 20 years from now. And there's a part of me that's, in how fast things move, it's crazy that, 2 weeks ago, the United States Capitol, was breached, and it feels like old news.
Yeah.
It feels like, that happened so long ago. It's this was batshit crazy that this happened, but it's starting to feel outdated.
Yeah, so I don't know if we have international listeners, but just as a quick summary, I feel like it's a good thing to do. We recorded our last episode of the podcast January 5th. On the afternoon of January 6th, Donald Trump incited a mob of his supporters to breach into the Capitol building and, wander the halls of Congress.
And there was a mix. There were some people there who were just seemed to be along for the ride, oh my gosh, this is crazy, I'm gonna vlog it, or we're breaking in the Capitol. And there were also people there who were vandalizing art. There were people there who were shouting, "Hang Pence," or looking for Nancy Pelosi. There were people with zip cuffs, and there were people with weapons. So It was a dangerous mix. You had the people who were just seemed to be kind of fanatic and along for the ride, and you had the people who seemed to have planned this out and were very intent on doing harm.
Yes, and due to the chaos and the violence of the situation, 5 people are dead, including a Capitol Hill police officer.
Yeah. And including one woman who was shot by authorities.
Yes.
The other people seemed to be like trampled or had a heart attack, but there were 2 people who were like violently killed.
Right. And so, yeah, I guess our podcast topic today is talking about the current political situation that has arisen because of the storming of the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, well, and just in the past days, there's been so much fallout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in fact, we're recording this, as you mentioned, on Inauguration Day, so there's a lot of, politics to look at there.
Well, yeah, there are, more troops in Washington, D.C. right now than are active overseas?
Something like that, yeah. Obama's 2010 troop surge to Afghanistan was 30,000 troops. There's currently 25,000 troops stationed in and around Washington, D.C.
Pictures do much more than what we can say, but, D.C. is very militarized right now, which is kind of crazy.
Yes, the Capitol building is full of active duty soldiers, and the last time that happened was the Civil War.
Yeah, so. They are sleeping in the Capitol building, some of them, which is crazy. I don't think that we're going to have some insightful new take on the Capitol attack. In fact, I think that we will probably primarily talk about what's happened since then, because really all I have to offer for that day is it's crazy and horrifying, but also even when I was watching it happen live, I wasn't surprised.
No.
It just seemed fitting almost for the end of, or the start of 2021 and the end of this presidency. And maybe that's just me being numb, or maybe that's, is indicative of the larger trend we're seeing. But there was a part of my mind that was just you tell people that you're subverting democracy, that the democracy is being subverted. You tell them that enough, and they're going to do something about it. Because I kind of empathize for the people who stormed the Capitol. And I think what they did was abhorrent, absolutely wrong. If I personally thought that this was the end of democracy in the United States and that our election process was being completely subverted, I might do something like what they did. I just think they're on the wrong side of history because they've been fed lies for the past months and months and years.
Yes. I've pulled up some polling here to help inform our discussion. Among voters who believe that enough fraud took place to change the outcome of the presidential election, 56% support the storming of the U.S. Capitol.
Who's this poll from?
This was a poll done by YouGov, an organization called YouGov, of 1,400 registered voters.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, and it's really a crazy experience, but it's not surprising in other ways.
No. The shock may have been an emotion I felt. I never felt surprised.
Yeah.
I almost felt figured. Almost I was I'm a college student, and I could have seen this coming. It's not. What a shocker! No, it's not.
No. Even in the days before the breach of Capitol Hill, people who were in the Donald Trump cultural bubble were talking online about how they were going to storm the Capitol building. And in some ways, it felt like that meme where everyone said, hey, if we all show up and storm Area 51 at once, they can't stop all of us, we'll see the aliens.
Yeah. Yeah. But then also there was, I remember kind of seeing a breakdown of things, and this was after the fact that kind of this reporting happened, but people asking very tactical questions, some news agency, probably the New York Times, pulled up a thing where yeah, look, this person here is asking, hey, does anyone know if the windows on the second floor are reinforced and bulletproof? It's that's a very specific question you're asking there.
Right, yeah. And so the reason that people were able to breach the U.S. Capitol, from all of the, people have said this better than we have, but basically the police don't think of the president's supporters or other right-wing groups as a threat.
Yeah, they were underprepared. They seemingly drastically underestimated the risk, even though intelligence agencies and news agencies were hey, this is a risk.
Yeah, and that's not entirely the Capitol Hill Police's fault. They repeatedly asked for National Guard support for that day, for extra security, and someone in the Trump administration denied them that extra support.
Yeah, and part of that, may have been kind of a political shenanigans move. But there's a part of that where I think there were people saying, hey, this is not the image we want to present. We don't want to posture as this militarized thing. It'll look worse overall if we, look like we're doing this vote counting under, military lock and key.
Yeah.
But at the same time, It's like there were credible threats. More could have been done.
And I agree with you. I don't think it's political shenanigans. I don't think that this was something that was maliciously intended.
No, I think it's just a product of the problems already in our systems.
And the Trump administration had spent the months beforehand systemically gutting the national security infrastructure of personnel. And so there may just not have been anyone to answer the call, so to speak.
Yeah, but I think as far as talking about the day, that's probably all we have to offer. And I think something that we should touch on, but at some point probably deserves a whole other episode, is the fact that in the kind of aftershock of all of that, Donald Trump was banned at first temporarily and now indefinitely from Twitter and other social media platforms, which raises all sorts of questions about what the line between free speech and the power of companies and what the lines on social media should be between allowing people to say what they want and, well, having some ability to hold these platforms accountable for the content that is on them.
Yes.
Which I think is a very complex topic and one that we can't address as a little subheading.
Yeah, absolutely. But that may be a future episode. We've got a lot of future episodes to
well, and I think not even just in the context specifically of the president. There's a lot of other things going on with that. Yeah, because there's not a simple answer of just like, yep, it's good to ban the president, or no, you should never ban anyone. Like, there's no easy answer to that. Although one thing that I will say about that I thought was kind of funny, of just that Twitter was like, said, hey, in addition to the president, we're kind of doing this a routine culling of accounts that are inactive or might be bots, but also we're banning a bunch of neo-Nazis, white supremacists, extremists from our platform. We're kind of going to do a review and cut a bunch of people off that, are breaking their terms of service. And then the next day, a bunch of conservative politicians, Republicans in Congress, were like, oh my gosh, and this is them on national TV. I just lost so many Twitter followers. What the heck, Twitter? You're silencing my base. I can't believe you're doing this. And you're on national TV days after our Capitol has been attacked, in the middle of a raging pandemic, and you're gonna bitch about Twitter followers? Like, that really shows where your priorities lie. But also, maybe when Twitter says we just got rid of a bunch of white supremacists and neo-Nazis, not the best time to complain about losing followers, you know? Like, because even if you think Twitter is a bit superfluous with who it bans, they're probably not the people they banned because they say they're white supremacists. Even if you don't think they should be banned from Twitter, maybe not the people you want to really, hold on to as your valued base.
Yeah. Who knows? The people who stormed the U.S. Capitol building, as you mentioned, many of them are various forms of fascist or white supremacist. But of the people, but Republicans, 45% of Republicans support the people who stormed the Capitol building.
Or at least, support them for the reasons, not necessarily their methods.
Sir, yes. Well, actually, I take that's not quite true. The question specifically asks, do you support these actions, referring to storming the U.S. Capitol?
And that's all Republicans, or just people who believe that enough fraud happened to change the election?
Of people who believe enough fraud happened to change the election, 56%, a majority, support them. Of all Republicans, 45% support the storming of the U.S. Capitol. For Republican politicians to go on national TV and say, hey, and defend the people who stormed the U.S. Capitol and other people of that philosophy, white supremacists and neo-Nazis, makes sense. That's their base now.
Yeah, and my gut reaction is I've got to imagine that poll is overestimating that, and especially with a sample size of 1,400. But I do think, and even though my gut feeling is that that's probably overestimating it, I think that there's enough people who believe that to be significant. Even if it's not all the way up to 40-something%. And I think the interesting thing about these different, hate groups and just other groups is, and this is not even beyond the scope of this episode, but just beyond what we can speak to. There are, experts who can speak better to this, but this kind of coming together of a lot of different groups, whether that's your kind of Proud Boys or, your 3%ers, your kind of more militia-y groups, and then also white supremacists, and then also the QAnon conspiracy, and then also just kind of diehard Trump supporters, and the list could go on and on. anti-vaxxers, all sorts of these kind of what used to be isolated either conspiracies or extremisms or just, very political groups or whatever, used to be much more separate. And it seems in the past few years we've seen these more radical groups on, that kind of tend towards conspiracy or tend towards extreme far right, metastasizing into this like one collective. The people who attacked the Capitol were from all sorts of kind of different backgrounds within that, web of different groups, and they're starting to kind of rally together behind, stop the steal, that this election was fraudulent, which I think is concerning, and that on their own, a lot of these groups maybe couldn't do as much or didn't have as much sway, but when all the people in QAnon and all the people in these kind of militia-y and a bunch of people, who are hardline, extreme Trump supporters, not just people who voted for him, but like extremist Trump supporters, if they all start coming together, like that starts to be a much more powerful movement.
Feels like Avengers Infinity War. But instead of defeating Thanos, all the groups are coming together to
defeat Joe Biden.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who's gonna snap his fingers and take away their guns?
Who knows?
But yeah. But moving on, from the Capitol riot and Twitter, what's next? Probably the impeachment is next. The fact that Donald Trump has been impeached twice.
It's pretty clear legally that he can be impeached after he leaves office, especially because if he is convicted by the Senate, they can then have a simple majority vote to ban him from ever holding public office again.
The whole, I just don't know what to do with, the whole impeachment. Because I think that, I think Congress is within its right to impeach the president. That's a power that they have. I also think that, I'm not a legal expert, but, when it comes down to it, he probably did enough stuff to deserve impeachment. Not just in what he said, on the day of the Capitol attack, but also just, the lies he's been spreading for months and months and some of the calls he's had. I don't know what to do with it because, it happens so fast and just, I am fervently of the belief that the biggest danger to our country is division, and I think that, what feels right to me is that the president should have been impeached, right? He did impeachable offenses, he should be impeached. I'm very interested, trying to think about it more academically, if your only goal, and this is, some of the more extreme Republicans, the argument they use, they say, this is, even if he deserves it, it's bad for unity, you talk about wanting to unite people, this is just going to divide them farther apart. And I don't really buy that as a reason not to impeach him, but I think it's just an excuse. But I think that I don't think it's based on nothing. Even lies are based on something. I think there is something there that, if we're going to have a state of unity, I think we need to start with accountability. People need to be held accountable for their actions. But at the same time, I don't know what to do with it. I don't have I think that, the right thing was probably for him to be impeached because he did impeachable offenses and, this is the power that Congress had. They exercised their power. But, I don't, in 20 years, is that going to be a rallying cry? Or in 4 years or whatever.
I think the people who stormed the U.S. Capitol, as much as you value unity over disunity, the people who stormed the U.S. Capitol don't care about unity, they care about power. And so, as many overtures as you make towards them about unity, they're not going to, put down their signs and their guns and come be friends again.
Well, and even just thinking about 2024, if he gets convicted by the Senate and isn't allowed to run for future office, I'm not necessarily going to come down on a hard stance of whether I think he should be barred from future office. I would really enjoy it if he was. Does that mean it's necessarily 100% the right thing? I feel like it probably is, but I have not made a hard opinion on that. And maybe he'd just try and get his son elected or whatever, but I don't know if Trump could handle the ego hit that would be. Right. But, if he doesn't get convicted, being impeached a second time would be a real good way to look like a victim come 2024 and be like, look what they did to me.
Yeah, and I think if the Biden administration, I don't think they're going to do this, but if the Biden administration was just obsessed with punishing Trump as their policy, that's going to be problematic. That's going to cause disunity. probably the right thing for Biden to do is to say to his Justice Department, hey, no holds barred. If he committed crimes, you can hold... If Trump or his family or his administration committed crimes, you can hold them accountable for that. But then to not have any, active hand in pushing that on them.
Let other people take care of that.
Right. Which I think they will do.
Yeah, I mean, even when they were talking about in the Senate, the Biden administration was very much like, hey, we do not want to only be doing this in the first days of our presidency. Like, we want to be talking about coronavirus relief stuff. Interestingly, though, unless he does it in the next, whatever, very few hours, it seems like Trump didn't pardon himself.
Yep. Which is surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of surprised, too. It's weird that I'm not surprised by our Capitol being attacked, but I am surprised by our president not pardoning himself. But, and I'm not just saying that for, hyperbole and a laugh. I honestly am more surprised that he didn't pardon himself than people violently attacked our Capitol.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't know why. If I was in his shoes, I'd probably pardon myself. I don't know why he didn't do it. But, props to you, I suppose.
I guess. Maybe he didn't do it because that would require admitting that he did something that needs pardoning.
Yeah.
He did something wrong. Who knows?
That's interesting. A question that we thought might have to be answered, but seems like it isn't. He did pardon, however, quite a few people today, this morning, or last night and this morning. I haven't necessarily been able to go through and read, a whole bunch of stuff on that, but, not a huge surprise. There are some people in there who seem to be corrupt.
A bit of a tangent about pardons, presidential pardons. Trump is an unusual president in that he didn't give out very many pardons. He has given out 200 or 300 pardons over the course of his term in office, and previous presidents have given out thousands. What is significant is who those pardons went to.
Yeah.
So in the final days of the Obama administration, President Obama pardoned 1,500 nonviolent drug offenders who had made, significant contributions to their community or something like that.
Yeah.
Basically, good people who were kept in jail because of a mistake they made several years ago over nonviolent drug crime.
Yeah.
And he pardoned 1,500 of those people in his final days in office. He had a regular and systematic way of people appealing to the president to ask for pardons. He pardoned dozens of people, every month on a regular basis over his whole term in office. Just a regular part of his administration was finding people worthy of pardons and pardoning them. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has given out relatively few pardons, and they have gone to primarily political or ideological allies.
Much more kind of high-profile people in Washington,
Yes.
or people who are involved in kind of the political process, or who are involved in Trump. I feel like
Yes.
in the past, most of the presidential pardons were not to people who had any interaction with the president of the United States, and it seems like a concerning number of the pardons of this administration were directly tied to the Trump administration.
Yes. It's partly that the Trump administration in 4 years had 3 or 4 times as many felony convictions as the whole 7 years of the Nixon administration. But, yeah, Trump is basically just...
Yeah, and you're talking about his administration, not in the country.
Yes.
Yes.
His administration.
Yes.
Yeah. Trump basically just pardoned former advisors and political allies.
Yeah, which is, real sketch.
Mm-hmm.
Not the most, ethical thing in my personal opinion.
No.
But yeah, what's happened since then? I feel like stuff has happened.
There's been, as you mentioned, people, live streamed themselves storming the U.S. Capitol. There's a lot of footage out there.
Oh, yeah. No, it's kind of weird that people who are like, oh my gosh, Bill Gates might put a microchip in my arm with the vaccine, or they're so worried about the government tracking them on social media, or they're about government oversight and about being anonymous. They're like, okay, so you're going to do that, but then you're going to, in the middle of a pandemic, storm the Capitol without any sort of mask, which would also hide your identity. If you want to protest not wearing masks by, making your identity clearly visible to the authorities, I think you should have wore a mask for people's safety. But this is very convenient, and that means it's easy for you to be prosecuted.
Yes. As far back as 2014, police were using facial recognition softwares in the Ferguson protests to identify and arrest protesters.
And that's why a bunch of at the Black Lives Matter protests, most people there, A, because of pandemic, but B, because of hiding their identity, were like, phone on the airplane, put, mask and glasses on, and then you see people storming the Capitol. It's like, and asking people, even a cop, for a selfie, or people taking pictures in offices, and it's just like, not only are you, doing crime and something I think is atrocious, but you're just really bad at it. Like, what are you doing? Why are you taking pictures?
Yeah. But so there's been a lot of footage, I guess, of the Capitol Hill storming, and it's been really disturbing, some of the things that happened. You sent a video to me earlier this week.
The New Yorker, partway through the week, it was from the New Yorker, the video that I sent, released footage that hadn't been seen before.
Yes, and in this footage, the mob entered the Senate chamber and was rifling through the papers and desks of senators, trying to find dirt on political adversaries or evidence that their political allies had flipped on them, or...
Yeah, they'd have their phone recording video, and they just go open some document they don't know anything about and just flip through it page by page, recording all of it, and then go to the next desk. And it's just, and I think said something along the lines of there's got to be something here we can use against some expletive.
Right. And they, for example, went to, I believe it was Ted Cruz's Senate desk, and found his desk.
Another sign of their inepticism. They went to Ted Cruz's desk and found basically his, complaint that he was going to argue against certifying the votes for Arizona. And initially some of them were like, oh my gosh, he flipped on us. He's going to argue against Arizona. And then someone came over and read it for 1 second. It was like, no, guys, this means that he's going to challenge the votes. And they're like, oh yeah, he's on our side. And it's like, yep, that's what it said.
Yeah. So a very bizarre combination of professional document intelligence gathering. It wasn't just like, hey, let's have a party in the Capitol. It's, let's go take intelligence.
Yeah.
But combined with, they don't actually know what any of these documents mean.
Yeah.
So that was bizarre to see. And what's more, that type of, let's find dirt on them, let's intimidate them, let's string up Mike Pence, it worked.
Yeah, well, I mean, people chanted, hang Mike Pence, and a noose was erected in front of the Capitol.
Yes, and they were, hundreds of feet away from Mike Pence as he was being evacuated, and they were storming the building.
Less than hundreds. Yeah. There were times where it was tens. They were very close to lawmakers and the vice president at times.
And so, in some sense, it's comical to see that they can't even read Senate documents. But on the other hand, it's terrifying to see that they were almost, they wanted to kill members of Congress and almost did.
Yeah. Well, and it also, people will say this about Trump and his administration, that, the next person with this little, with that disregards democracy this much won't be as inept. They'll be better at it. In the same way, it's concerning that, there were certainly people in this crowd who kind of knew what they were doing. They may have scoped it out ahead of time or planned, but there was a lot of people who were just, along for the ride and just, dumb in their actions. What they did was stupid, and how they went about it wasn't very smart. And the fact that people who didn't plan it very much, there was some planning, but most of them were just kind of there, and were clearly not the smartest when it comes to these type of things. I'm not going to say everyone there was an idiot, but they went about it stupidly. What if what if this was an organized militia that tried to do this, or
someone
what if,
who had been training.
What if a year from now, what happened in Michigan, and the attempt to kidnap the governor there, what if we start to see organized militia start to be if a bunch of randos could break into the U.S. Capitol building, if we train and prepare and, Ocean's 11 this for 6 months, I'm worried that might embolden people who are better, who have practiced.
Yes.
Because if you can have idiots get into the Capitol building and steal intelligence from the United States of America, what could people who are actually trained and actually armed and actually, practiced at crime, what could they do to the United States of America?
Mm-hmm. And there were some of those people who stormed the Capitol.
Yeah, there were.
There have been conspiracy theories about Republican senators giving intelligence or tours to these insurrectionists beforehand, specifically because as soon as the Capitol was breached, some people sprinted to the unmarked non-public offices of very liberal congressmen and congresswomen, which, I mean, all members of Congress have a small public office that is kind of formal, but then in the back of the Capitol building, they have unmarked, cubicles for their employees, and these insurrectionists basically sprinted to the very specific unmarked offices of people they didn't like. And so there's been conspiracy theories that they had inside help, inside training. Conservative members of Congress told these rioters where to go to find people. And so that type of Ocean's 11, as you say, may have already happened. We just don't know about it.
And we don't really, that's, mostly conspiracy, like you say. But, I think there's an investigation going into some lawmakers and some Capitol Police. It's not just complete hogwash. There, people in power are actually interested in, hey, did someone on the inside help them out a little bit?
I mean, there were rather concerning images of Capitol Hill police officers taking selfies and celebrating with the rioters.
Yeah, which is just,
inside the rotunda.
Not good.
No. And so all of that, it was just a bizarre mix just to observe. It was a bizarre mix of ineptitude and deadly precision.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is not necessarily maybe not Donald Trump as a person, or maybe not his but the kind of movement that is people being radically supportive of Donald Trump. This seems to perfectly reflect that. You have this mix of severe consequences and some people who do know what they're doing, mixed in with a whole bunch of people who are just kind of along for the ride and willing to do crazy stuff. And, that's not everyone who voted for Trump, and that's not everyone in the Trump administration. But I think if you step back, even people who might have voted for him are he's kind of silly. He's kind of dumb. He does stuff that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And sometimes it has dangerous, in this case, deadly consequences. And that doesn't seem to just be this attack. It seems to maybe be a reflection on the last 4 years of you have things that are just stupid, or there's a lot of stuff that the Trump administration did that people have made fun of, that they've laughed at just because it's weird and untraditional. And then if you actually unpack it, there's real consequences associated with it.
The ones that are coming to mind are the much more silly ones, like when he had a press conference at Four Seasons Landscaping instead of the Four Seasons Hotel.
Yeah, and but that's the thing. You mix that in with other things that he's done, pulling out, in my opinion, pulling out of the Paris Accord, or public health measures that are just this mix of just stuff that is batshit crazy and kind of funny, and stuff that's batshit crazy and kind of terrifying.
Yeah, like the time he gave away top secret intelligence gathering methods to Russian politicians in the Oval Office as a way of bragging.
Or when he multiple times posted satire news articles to Twitter, not seeming to know they were satire.
Yeah. I guess what I've been trying to get at here is this combination of a lot of these people are, as you said, just kind of inept. They think he's funny. They're along for the ride. But some people are very clearly deadly serious about this. And members of Congress really responded to that threat. After the Capitol building was stormed, until 4 a.m. that morning, Congress returned and finished certifying the election results that same day.
Yeah.
And when that happened, it took until 4 a.m. because 6 Republican senators and 2/3 of the Republican members of the House continued to insist that the election was stolen and object to the results, the very same conspiracy theory that encouraged these people to storm the U.S. Capitol in the first place.
Yeah.
The people who objected to the election, of course, did not say this themselves, but many of their colleagues in Congress said, I've had conversations with them, they're objecting to the election results not because they believe the election was fraudulent, but because they're terrified for their life. The threats of the mob worked.
Oh, yeah, I think that very few, if any, there's maybe a few lawmakers, if any, that actually believe that the election was fraudulent, Yeah. Especially, when you have lawmakers who were elected to the position they are now, in the very same election they are claiming is fraudulent. It's interesting that all of these claims are only on the presidential election, even though on the same ballot many, Republicans were also elected. And so you sometimes have people who are saying the very election they were elected in was fraudulent, but only in the presidency.
Right.
Which is, interesting.
But that intimidation appears to have worked. Members of Congress who know better are continuing to feed the same lies that nearly killed them, because if they break with their party and say a lie is a lie, then they're going to be faced with the consequences for it, and they're terrified.
And that consequence might be people like violently trying to hurt them, when Mike Pence has been an ally of Trump, seemingly all along, but as soon as he said, no, I can't completely subvert democracy, it's not in my power. It's not even that I won't do it. It's not in my power. Sorry guys, I can't completely overturn this election for you. It's just not in my power. As soon as he did that, they flipped on him. And Trump did, and then people were like, hey, our vice president, the Republican vice president,
who we voted for in November.
Yeah, we're going to kill him now because he didn't change the election.
Yeah.
They literally said, hang Mike Pence.
And had a noose. I mean, it's terrifying. And so the Republican Party now is faced with, we've got these crazy people as our political base. Are we going to take the risk of standing up to them? The Republican Party has been feeding them lies and inciting them to hatred and violence for the last, decades, but especially the last 4 years, because it is politically advantageous. It riles these people up enough that they will storm the U.S. Capitol or all turn out and vote.
Yeah, not even violent consequences. If you go against that, the consequences are going to hit you come election time.
Yes. And so the Republican Party now has been feeding this nativism, this racism, these lies for a very long time, and we now see the natural consequences of this. If you tell people the election was stolen, they're going to believe you and storm the U.S. Capitol.
Which, it isn't surprising to me. If I was in, like I said earlier, if I was in those shoes, it's well, no shit. If you tell people long enough that the end of democracy is happening, they're probably going to do something about it, because at the end of the day, people who really care about democracy and our country are going to do something if it's falling apart. And it's just interesting that the very claims of why Congress people wanted to challenge votes in the first place often wasn't that the fraud actually happened, but they were like, hey, a lot of my base thinks fraud happened. All these people think it happened, so we need to do something about it. We need to act like it did. When the reason that they believe that in the first place is because you've been telling them that. It's just such a circular reasoning of just, I told people that the election was rigged. They believed me, and now enough of them believe it that it's real enough that we should do something about it. And it's just they believe it because you told them.
Yes. And so the Republican Party has been riding the tiger for a long time of these kinds of extremist beliefs, the people who are extremists and support them. And now they got to figure out how to get off the tiger. And at least 2/3 of Republicans in the House don't appear to have a way to do that. And especially when it came to impeaching Donald Trump for what was, he clearly said, I'm going to march with you down Pennsylvania, let's storm the Capitol.
Well, and it's interesting just to see, academically, I'm very interested in seeing, what happens to the Republican Party in the next few years.
Oh, I'm fascinated.
The next 4 or 8 years. And that's probably a whole other podcast episode in and of itself. But, you see people, some Congress, decently Republican people are starting to be like, oh, hey, they're very much, there are some people still along with Trump, but, even McConnell said, that Trump, at least provoked the Capitol mob, Mm-hmm. So, it does seem like there is some distancing starting to happen already, but we'll see how long that lasts and how far it goes.
Yeah, all the calls to kind of forgive and move on from Republicans, I think, betray a strategy that is, hey, if we just pretend that nothing happened and move on, everyone will forget about this and we can go back to being in charge and being normal.
Yeah, well, and also just the kind of, and this is constant for both sides of the political spectrum, but this whataboutism of often the arguments made well, what about the riot? What about the Black Lives Matter protests? What about all the stuff they did? And there are differences between those things, both in how they protest and the values and the goals they were going for. But at the same time, lawmakers, senators, Congress people are just oh, but what about the violence of the Black Lives Matter protests? And my response would be, it was wrong when it happened then, and it's wrong when it happened now. And they're like, but what about it? It happened, and it was the left. And I'm like, yes, and when they did it, it was wrong. And it's also wrong here. Mm-hmm. And it just seems like often the argument ends there. It's like, but they did it too, and it's bad, and they did it too. And it's like, yes, they did, and it was wrong when they did it. So it's also wrong here. And they're like, yeah, it's wrong, but they did it too. It's like, we're done. Like, this is not what we're talking about. And this is lawmakers and people in class. Like, come on.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, the future of the Republican Party will probably need to be its own episode. That's fascinating.
Most definitely.
Me, at least. It's just such a bizarre time in U.S. politics, and I don't know what the Biden administration is going to do with it. I just yesterday afternoon finished Barack Obama's latest memoir, Promised Land. It's a great book. It's the Promised Land is the first part out of a 2-part memoir, and it covers his early political career, his election, up until May of 2011 with the assassination of Osama bin Laden. Reading his memoir and very vaguely remembering news from when I was a child, it's really interesting to hear all the crises that Obama dealt with. When he inherited the economy he inherited from George Bush was teetering on the brink of a second Great Depression. The economic projection was this will be as bad or worse than the Great Depression, very serious things. And he managed to fix that crisis and pull the country back from the brink economically. The climate crisis was something he was really trying to address, and although he was unable to get legislation passed, he did some significant diplomacy in starting the process of getting the Paris Accords. The Deepwater Horizon disaster happened in his first 2 years in office. The worst oil spill in U.S. history was something that his administration dealt with. He was dealing with 2 wars and the Arab Spring. Just a whole laundry list of crises and very serious, immediate problems that he had to deal with. And when he left office, the economy had been in the longest period of continuous growth ever. The Paris Climate Accords had been signed. He got an Iran nuclear deal to limit Iran's nuclear program. He'd been working on the Trans-Pacific Partnership to limit the influence of China over the world stage. He really left the country in a great place. Donald Trump has done nothing for 4 years and has squandered all that progress, and then some. And now we're back with racial, economic, and climate and health crises, environmental crises all at once, and the Biden administration now has to come in and deal with all those crises again. So seeing those parallels from things I vaguely remember as a child to now the current incoming administration, it's now 2 hours or less until Biden is sworn in, it's very interesting to see what a similar situation we are in 2021 as we were in 2009.
Yeah, well, and it just seems like, there's a level of that where, those threads kind of continue of, it wasn't, it's not all Trump's fault. There are things that just...
No.
You're not saying that, but I just wanted to make that clear to our listeners.
That.
These problems have, whether it's racial, environmental, economic, now with health, but there were health problems in our country even before the pandemic. And so just it seems like, and this might be trying to get towards a bow to wrap this episode up, but not necessarily a nice one. These problems have kind of been around for a while and are just seem to all be getting worse. Environmentally, especially in the past 4 years, the world, just every year that goes by, there's more carbon in the air.
And it's warmer.
Yeah, and therefore that's warmer. And so, every year we're getting closer to catastrophes worse than we already see caused by climate change. Now we have the pandemic and kind of the economic things that have been caused by that. But even before that, not making a stance on, whether this is right or wrong, even though I think it's not the best. Wealth disparity has just been continually increasing in the United States for quite a while now. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And that's just unsustainable. No matter what you believe about wealth or capitalism, no matter what you believe about that, eventually, if the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, eventually you get to a point where it's not sustainable. And it doesn't seem like anything's really happening right now to change that course. And so it just seems like with, economic disparity and now economic downturn due to the pandemic, just the pandemic on its own, the looming threat of climate change, racial, socioeconomic, most protected categories, whether it's, age, sexuality, religion. There's concerning disparities. I think that, socioeconomic status and race might be where we see some of the most concerning ones. But there are just so many things in our country that seem to be getting worse and worse, and I suppose the question is, well, what is the turning point? And I think some people who stormed the Capitol believed that what they were doing that day might have been that turning point.
Right. They were finally going to take back their country and fix all the problems.
Yeah. People, people deeply disagree about things in this country, but I think almost everyone feels like at some point there's going to be some turning point. And I think most of us feel like that turning point isn't exactly going to be a fun one. Like, I don't think that people are like, oh, some good thing's going to come along and fix our problems and unite us. And maybe it will. I'm not necessarily Joe Biden or even a political figure, but maybe something will come along and unite us. But if a pandemic couldn't unite us, like if that type of thing that affects everyone and is horrible and, 2,000 something people died yesterday, if that can't unite us as a country, I don't know what would. Maybe a war, but I'm not really looking to have a war right now.
No.
And so I think we all feel like there's got to be some turning point. And I think some people are starting to try and take it into their own hands, by storming the Capitol. We're trying to change this election and make that turning point happen. And I've got no idea what it's going to be, but eventually something's got to give. Whether it's economic, climate, health, political, something's got to give because we are hurting in most areas.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it's going to be, and it's terrifying.
No. Maybe when the zombies show up, then we'll all have a clear purpose and gather around that. I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I've definitely talked about this with you. It's Tolkien's idea of eutastrophe.
Yes, we talked about that in our surprisingly Zen about the collapse of democracy episode.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess this is a similar theme, and I want to talk about it again. Tolkien was from his Christian faith, was very, felt strongly about this idea, philosophical idea of eutastrophe, that all of a sudden, out of the blue, something wonderful happens that changes everything and makes life better. And I'd love to see a eutastrophe in American life.
It'd be pretty swell. And maybe we could be seeing that with the pandemic. Like maybe, vaccine rollout's going to be, we haven't been doing the best of that, but maybe it's going to, change in the next, couple months, and it's going to continue to be effective, and that's going to really turn things around. Maybe the economy will come back faster than we expected. It's all possible.
It's all possible.
Yeah, it just seems like at some point in my lifetime, I think the word I would use to describe the United States right now, in almost every sense of that word, is unsustainable. How we do political discourse by, not being able to even just talk to each other, by seeming to exist in different realities almost, it's unsustainable. Eventually problems will come along, we won't be able to fix them, that's unsustainable. How we deal with our environment, in terms of climate change, but also pollution at a local and broader level, it's unsustainable. We can't keep producing energy in the ways that we do. We can't keep polluting with plastic in the ways that we do, because eventually it's going to cause effects that we can't ignore. How we deal with disparities between protected categories, how we deal with race, it's not sustainable. I think that progress is made and progress is lost, but in the end, if we stayed like we are right now forever, something would break. It's not sustainable. How we deal with wealth, some of the ideals of capitalism, well, I think that capitalism is effective and there are good parts to it. If that is what we value most, and we continue to see the rich get richer and the poor get poorer and more numerous, something's going to break. All of these things, it's all unsustainable, and if we don't do something to change it, I don't know which one's going to break us first or if they're going to break us all at the same time, but I don't know what we got to do, but we got to do something, because otherwise we're fucked.
Yeah.
That's the vibe of 2020 and 2021. We're unsustainable, and we don't seem to be trying to change it, and so we're screwed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess I don't have a lot of hope to offer either, other than just faith and hope for a eutastrophe, because, like you said, things are pretty bad.
Well, this was just a cheery episode of the podcast right here. Real full of hope.
Well, I guess here is some hope I can offer. Thinking back to our surprisingly zen about the collapse of democracy episode, things could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
In his memoir, Barack Obama talks about getting clobbered in the 2010 midterms, a lot worse than he expected to, because all of the significant progress his administration had made, especially on the economy, wasn't actually about fixing the problems that existed in society, as it was about preventing worse problems from happening.
Yeah, I mean, the Capitol riot could have been so much worse. Like, bombs could have gone off instead of just being discovered. You know, people...
Right.
There could have been
actually
way more
hung Mike Pence.
Yeah, there could have been way more shots fired, you know? There were guns on both sides, and luckily, you know, there wasn't much shooting. But, like, you know, it could have turned into an all-out firefight.
Yeah. We're having an inauguration today that is, considering it's 2021, pretty normal. There's a new administration coming in. Everyone seems to have a peaceful transition of power that they're committed to. And so, certainly the world looks bad, but it is important to remember that, although it's not very, helpful, things could have been a lot worse, right? The world is bad, but it's not irredeemably so. Thinking back to surprisingly Zen about the collapse of democracy, the Republican Party has more or less given up trying to overturn the election. They didn't need to. They could have kept fighting,
Yeah.
And the Capitol Hill riot kind of was a catharsis for them to get that out of their system, and now they're done.
No, it's, and so far the inauguration is, going seemingly smoothly. It's 10:24, and we will be done recording our episode before, the inauguration actually takes place. So maybe I'm going to eat my words and something bad is going to happen. But, right now I'm watching the New York Times live stream of, a motorcade going towards, that would be the Capitol?
Yep.
Yeah. And, cars going down the street, it's all looking okay, and is there soldiers everywhere? Yes, there are soldiers everywhere. And so maybe there was enough. Maybe enough has been done, and nothing bad is gonna happen. Maybe we're moving forward. Yeah, lots of maybes.
But at the very least, things could have been a lot worse. Yes. So I'll take some solace in that.
Yeah. All right. Anyways, I think this will do it for the episode. Talking about things, a little while after they happened. Although I think if we were going to cover the Capitol attack, having some context is probably the best way that we could offer something interesting about it. Because anyone could have recorded something on the day it was happening and be like, "Holy crap, this is wild."
Right.
And I think if anything, this will be interesting to listen back to in 10 years, or if I have kids someday, it'll be interesting to play for them.
Certainly. To
kind of show what the feeling was like when it was actually going down.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, I hope that if you listened, we didn't trigger too much existential dread, and that in some ways you enjoyed what we had to say, or you thought it was interesting. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions for us, feel free to send that to our email, which is in the description down below. But that's all we've got for today. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much for listening. I have been Noah.
And this is James from In My Experience.
Bye.